It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back, everybody. You're just in time. More Health Tuesdays here on your Feel Good Breakfast Show. It's not a new presenter. It's still me, everybody.
Love it.
Yes.
Love it.
Now, of course, many adults jumped at the opportunity to get vaccinated when the age group opened up. However, the decision on when and whether to vaccinate their children against COVID-19 is seeming to be a much more daunting one for parents to make. However, Dr. Emil Reid joined us again to give us the facts regarding the COVID-19 vaccination in kids. And I think it is such an important one to have right now because 35,000 kids has already been vaccinated in South Africa.
Yeah. Wow. We're on our way. I noticed you're looking at the week. We can sort you out if you really
Please, I've actually already made an appointment.
Have you made your appointment? Good for that. We can understand the trepidation. From the perspective of a parent, there is always going to be a little bit of hesitancy. With all the new variants that we have come into contact with over the recent kind of stanza of us having these chats, are children still likely to develop less serious problems if they contract COVID, or any of the new variants giving us a greater cause for concern?
Well, guys, I think the most important thing was kids wasn't at high risk to develop complications or even to die from COVID. What was a massive game changer was indeed the Delta variant. So things changed when the Delta variant came along. And as part of the strategy, especially the public health strategy of vaccination and to eradicate or control certain diseases, I mean, kids should be vaccinated as part of that strategy. Although kids were not a priority, and I think in South Africa, we were planning on vaccinating kids probably 2022, 2023 only. But due to the surplus of vaccines, and particularly due to the fact that people over the age of 50 were quite hesitant and did not get to vaccinate, obviously, we need to expand the program to include kids as well, even though the priority is much lower as for adults over the age of 50.
Less health complications, but they still can spread it.
Absolutely. So kids can spread it, number one. They can still get ill because of it. And then, obviously, kids can also develop what we call long-term COVID. Yeah. And I mean, that is a horrible thing for especially for kids who's busy doing sports, going back to school. And you can just imagine feeling tired, having brain fog, having headaches, chest aches, etc. Long COVID is a huge problem. And vaccinations have been shown to decrease long COVID with about 70%.
Wow.
Doctor, are the symptoms for kids and adolescents the same when it comes to COVID-19 complications?
Yeah, they're roughly the same. And the only different thing that kids can develop is what we call MSIS-C, which stands for multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children, which usually develop about 2 to 6 weeks after a child had COVID. And what that is, it causes what we call a Kawasaki-like syndrome, where kids develop shortness of breath, they develop abdominal pain, they develop confusion, severe conjunctivitis, and they can even end up in the intensive care unit. Again, not because of the virus itself, but due to the inflammatory response that the virus elicits in your body.
Yeah, we've heard the word inflammation a number of occasions here, and that seems to be, especially when it comes to the long COVID, how this can just stay in the system for so long. We are speaking specifically to parents out here. If you are feeling hesitant about having your child get the vaccine, hopefully we can allay those fears. We're going to continue our discussion. A couple of terms, myocarditis, pericarditis, heart attacks. I want you to think about those key words because they strike fear into our hearts, but we're going to debunk some of those myths in just a moment.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Yes, we are back with that dapper gent. Dr. Emile Reid is answering some of the many questions that have come about as a result of the shift with vaccines, obviously the COVID-19 vaccine now turning to children between the ages of 12 and 17. And obviously there's been some trepidation from the side of parents, and hopefully we can debunk some myths and allay your fears, because ultimately we do need to get vaccinated, all of us. That being said, do the kids have a choice?
Well, that's a very difficult question. I think myself being a parent of teenagers, I think the important thing is for kids and for parents to actually have this conversation. And because if we look at the law, around about 2005, kids over the age of 12, they do not need their parents' permission to give consent for medical treatment. So if kids needed a HIV test, kids want to go for contraception, they could actually do it without their parents, but that doesn't give anybody the reason not to have a discussion around a table about this. I definitely had a discussion with my kids regarding vaccination, and I think that's the way forward with regards to this.
Certainly. Of course, we have a social media question as well for you, Dr. Emile Reid, from Sarah Vessels, who says, if your child has a chronic disease, is it safe, and do I, as his mom, use my ID document or his birth certificate?
Well, very good question. So the important thing is discuss it with the child, discuss it with the doctor involved. And obviously we know kids with chronic diseases and chronic underlying illnesses are at higher risk for acquiring COVID, as well as for the development of complications. So definitely a child that needs this vaccine, and you can go with an ID document or with or even with a passport as well.
Here's my question, sorry, G. If a child or teen had COVID-19, are they still at risk of, should they still get vaccinated?
Yes, the answer is yes. And the mirror image of adults, when you acquire COVID-19, your body will develop antibodies, and we call that natural immunity, which is fantastic. But natural immunity wanes as time progresses. And also we know that natural immunity is against that specific virus that caused the infection. So what we call hybrid immunity, where you have natural immunity and also get one shot of the vaccine, it actually improves your antibody levels for much longer, and it sustains it for much longer as well. So hybrid immunity is better than natural or vaccination immunity. But I mean, obviously acquiring COVID is always a risk with all the side effects and all the complications one can get. So prevention is better than cure.
On that note, Charmaine came through with this, quite an interesting question here. She's asking, good morning, Doc, she says, is it true that vaccinated people can also spread COVID? Yes, surely?
Yes, the answer to that is yes, but at a much lower risk of spreading it. So what we find is that people that are unvaccinated has a much higher virus load in their upper airways, which means that you can spread the virus much quicker and for longer. And then we also see that people who are vaccinated, one, has a much lower virus load, meaning chances are less likely for them to spread it. And then also people who are vaccinated gets the peak of the virus load, which actually goes down quite dramatically in the following 24 hours, because that low virus load is not going to be able to allow spreading of the virus. So yes, they can, but at a much lower risk as unvaccinated people.
Got to get the jab. That's the bottom line. So whether you're considering it for your child, and as doctors said, have that conversation with them, include them in the process. They ultimately have a choice in this as well, but it's up to you as the parent to get them to understand the need. We all need to move forward, and the only way that we can do that is if we are all vaccinated. Bottom line.